Hi, everyone, and welcome to our humble podcast, Legal Tech Light. I am Tammy French, Head of Strategic Partnerships. Today, as usual, I have with me Michelle Hamilton, our Managed Services Division Leader. And exciting, I have Joya Hull, and she does billing guideline review for Mosaic. So this is exciting. Hi, ladies.
Hello.
So we are going to talk today about a day in the life of a BGR. And Joya is perfect for this because Joya does this so much, and she, I'm sure, has so many stories and so many things to share. So I will let you take this away, Michelle.
Thanks, Tammy. So, Joya, one of the first things that I just want to ask is what is one thing that you think across the board should be an industry standard, but a lot of our clients don't necessarily follow it? Do you have any examples like that you can think of off the top of your head?
My first recommendation would always be thorough billing guidelines, because billing guideline is the client's billing guidelines are what typically drive the review. And the more thorough and specific they are in their guidelines, it makes my job easier, but it's also more effective and more efficient for the client because I can follow their rules and know that invoices are being submitted correctly in the format that they want, be it the leads format with the proper coding, and also knowing specific things that they will not reimburse for.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's always a good point. We talk about, billing guidelines all the time on our podcast, but it really, I think that you're probably one of the main people who knows the client's billing guidelines, sometimes better than the actual company people, I would say, because there have been times when we will knock something down or we will allow something to go through because it's listed in their guidelines as such, but then somebody further along in the review chain will decrease something or will knock something off, and then the firm comes to us and says, why did they do that? Why did you do this? And so, I think that specifically with your knowledge of all of the different clients' guidelines that you have reviewed and, done their billing guideline review, even some of our previous clients, I think that we know their guidelines sometimes better than some of the internal people do. Tammy, you look like you had something to say to that.
No, I was just saying, I agree with that. Like, I think sometimes since we work with them so much, we end up knowing it. And I think it's what Joya said is so important. Like, they need to be thorough. And we did talk about this before. It's important that your firms know, and you can communicate to them, look, it says right here in the guidelines, and you got these. So, let's please work on this. I mean, I think that's really important.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
And I know recently with some of our newer clients, they are updating their billing guidelines, and I've had the opportunity to go through their guidelines and make suggestions and recommendations, and just to make sure that they're covering all their bases. And again, I don't think a firm would ever take advantage of a client intentionally, but if it's not specifically stated in the guidelines, especially for things that the client doesn't want to pay for, typically overhead type things, if it doesn't specifically say that, then the firm is going to take advantage of it, and I can't blame them.
Well, no, I think that that's a good point. I mean, we've talked about this so many times internally as well as with our podcast, but making sure that the guidelines are very black and white, that there is very little room, if any room, to leave the firm to their own interpretation of specific points in the guidelines. I mean, we've discussed how important that is so many times, and I don't think it can ever be stated too much. It's one of the, I mean, like you said, it's like a driving factor in most of what you do day to day. I know you do other things besides BGR, but that is a main component of your job. With that, I'm curious, because we have clients, I mean, I know you do BGR for an insurance client. I know that you do BGR for a bank. I know you do BGR for many different industries. So I'm curious, and I'm not asking for specifics, of course, but what is one of the most egregious things you've seen on an invoice? And I'll just give you a little backstory really quick. I happened to see on an invoice that I was reviewing a long time ago when I first started doing BGR that, you know, a firm had charged the client for an after hours meeting, which is fine, and they catered a bunch of food, which is fine. The thing that I thought was a little egregious was the amount of alcohol that was purchased for the cater. And don't get me wrong, I mean, when we have client dinners, when we have dinners with our firms or whatever, I mean, it's pretty customary for people to have a glass of wine, 2 glasses of wine. That seems pretty normal, and most all of our clients will pay for that. I just thought that the amount of money that they spent specifically toward alcohol, because they itemized it for us in their supporting documentation. I should note that as well. It was just quite a lot, and I was just kind of surprised by that. So I'm curious, Joya, on your end, what's the most egregious thing you've come across?
I have also seen, I will say, when I do BGR, I'm extremely meticulous, and every invoice I look at, I feel like it's my own money, and how is my money being spent?
Sure.
And all of my clients require receipts for all expenses, especially when it comes to travel, meals, and things like that. And just because they have a receipt for a meal, I don't just look at the total to make sure it agrees. I look at the entire receipt itself. And especially if they have multiple travelers authorized, a lot of firms, a lot of clients only allow reimbursement by one of the attorneys, but there are certain situations where they will allow multiple attorneys. And I think one of the worst ones I saw was where they had alcoholic beverages on the receipt for a meal, but another attorney at the same meal expensed a receipt specifically for alcoholic beverages. And it was very clear on the receipt what it was for. And none of my clients, as part of their guidelines, they specifically state that they will not reimburse for alcoholic beverages. So that was one of the things where I marked down, because it wasn't allowed. And and I also will take the time where if somebody has a meal and then I see that they've also, as part of this meal, had a beverage that is not authorized, I will take the time to reduce the invoice, but figure the taxes correctly so that I make sure they are reimbursed for the portion, for the portion of the meal that they should be reimbursed for. But I would say that's the biggest thing that I see, and it doesn't happen often, but it does happen.
Well, Michelle, I have one for this that
Okay.
I just thought of.
Tell me.
Because I fill in sometimes reviewing when we have somebody who's on vacation or something. So I was reviewing an invoice and they were traveling. The attorneys were traveling, which, okay, that's, good. I understand there's going to be meals, there's going to, things like that. This particular invoice had, $1,500, $2,000 worth of meals for these traveling attorneys, which, is semi-acceptable as long as it's not filled with alcohol. But the funniest thing to me, and I don't know if this was egregious, but it was a Walmart receipt. And this Walmart receipt was over $1,800 for things like fruit roll-ups, fig bars. There were some crazy things on this Walmart receipt. And I reached out to the client and I'm like, are you okay with this? This seems a bit much to me.
Definitely.
So that was really interesting to me.
That's funny. I had not heard that story before, Tammy. That's a good one.
I just remembered.
Yeah, you and Tammy both brought something up that I'm really interested in talking about, and that is travel. So, Joya, I know for one of your clients specifically, because I used to work for that client as well, or work on that client as well, they will allow the traveling attorney or attorneys, depending on what they've allotted, they will allow them to bill at 50% of the travel time unless they're working on their specific matters while they're traveling, and in which case they'll pay 100%. I'm curious, is that pretty standard, or do you have where you find that most clients don't pay for travel?
For my other clients, either it's expensed in a different way, but typically I do not see travel time expensed at all. And the one client that I do have, it's specific, just half the time, unless they are clearly doing work. And what's funny, I've had them expense for the full amount of time, but they drove.
Oh, okay.
And I'm going, how do you drive and work at the same time? If you're flying, I can see it, but if you're driving, I'm a little nervous about that.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I was curious, it's been a little while since I've helped any of our clients rewrite their guidelines, and so I was curious what the current standard is for travel. And most of the invoices that I have looked at in recent months, because again, sometimes I, just like Tammy, I'll fill in, and I haven't seen any travel apart from that one client that I specifically remembered. And so I was just curious if that is a new standard, or if that's, something, because previously when I was doing a lot of BGR, it was with one specific client and they did allow the travel at 50%. So I'm interested to see where that goes, because now that everybody is working from home and remotely a lot as well, and we're not doing the traveling, we're having a lot of the Zoom meetings for court hearings and things like that. I'm curious, how the standards across the board will go with the new normal. Can you see my quotation marks? Yeah.
Yes.
So we'll say in all of the guidelines for my clients, they are very specific about travel and travel reimbursement. But when I'm doing the invoice review in and of itself, I don't see a lot of travel on invoices.
Well, what that means is that the firms are abiding by the guidelines. So way to go, firms. I love it.
That is really good.
I had one more really kind of fun question I want to ask you, because it leads into something else. But I have come across invoices that are hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they have so many receipts and so many supporting documentations for their expenses. And I'm just kind of curious, what's the most receipts that you've had to go through on an invoice? Do you remember off the top of your head? I'm sure it's been a lot.
The largest one was almost 300 pages of supporting documentation, and I literally spent 3 days reviewing that invoice. And I had to do it in such a way so that I could save it
Right.
and mark where I had stopped and then restarted. But it was a challenge. But everyone, I will say, of the 300 pages of supporting documentation, everything that the firm was supposed to have submitted was done and was done correctly. So that
Wow.
was amazing. Nothing was missing.
That is amazing. Kudos to that firm. That
Right.
is not
Yes.
easy feat. I mean, any of us on the Mosaic side who have done the BGR service can attest to how often we have to send invoices back to ask for additional documentation, or send it back to the firm. Hey, you forgot this receipt. Please, attach and resubmit. And so that's 300 pages. Wow, that's a lot. But that's really awesome. And so the reason I asked you that is because I was, kind of leading into what would be a suggestion that you would give firms when they're submitting invoices of that size and supporting documentation files of that size. What would be the easiest way, do you think, for them to, kind of line everything up so that it's kind of a checks and balances system? Do you understand what I'm asking?
Yes. I will say there is a firm, I wish I could give them a shout out, because when I see them, and they work across several of our clients, they do an incredible job with invoice submission. And when I say, when submitting expenses, detail is key. And what I love to see is the date of the invoice number, a good description, including the vendor name. And a lot of firms don't do this. They'll just submit, it may be 50 pages of documentation, and they just scan it and attach it, and there's no order. So you're literally searching through those 50 pages for each one of the expenses.
Right.
When a firm submits it in the order that the expenses are listed, it makes the review so much faster. There's no chance that I may mark down something because I can't find the receipt. It may be there, but when you're going through, when you start looking at 30 plus pages of documentation and expenses, when you're hunting and they're not in order, it makes, as thorough as I am, it still leaves room for errors.
Absolutely.
And I could inadvertently mark something down for a document that is there, but I just simply can't find it in the chaos. So that is one thing I would say is detail and scan and attach everything in order. And that makes review much faster. And the faster I can review it and action it to the next person in the review process, ultimately, the faster the firm will be paid.
The faster the firm will be paid. Very true. I cannot tell you how much I agree with everything you just said, Joya. When we're going through these pages and pages and pages of documentation, I mean, I've even suggested to firms, every specific type of receipt. So let's say that they were traveling for, a client's matters, and they were going to court, and they had meals, they had all of that stuff. So I would ask them, put all of your meals together, and then put all of those receipts together, and then put all of your, filing fees together, and put those receipts together, and keep everything together in the same kind of category when you're submitting the invoice, because that again will just make things easier for the reviewers throughout the invoice chain, because not only do you go through those supporting documentation, but I'm sure that the people, on the review chain after you are also looking at those documentations. And I think that they're expecting that if there's anything missing, we will catch that. And I would say that, I've done review for a long time. You've done review for a long time. Tammy's done it we're all very good at catching the things that aren't there, but we're also sometimes, you know, good at missing something that might be there, but it's in, like you said, just chaos, and we just miss it. So I think that we overall do a really good job of trying to catch all of those things, but again, there's that element of human error that we can't really take out of the equation. So,
well, and that leads me to think about, you know, just saying that the job of a billing guideline reviewer is tedious. It is tedious and takes time, but it's so important because it really does save the client money. And so, I mean, my hat goes off to everybody who does billing guideline review, because it is a tedious process.
well, I think you have to be a very meticulous, very detail-oriented person, and I think it's a very specific type of person. And so people like Joya and myself, we kind of thrive on those things because, you know, we're nitpicking, and I don't want to say nitpicking, that's not what we're doing, but we're meticulously looking at all of these different things and, you know, trying to make sure that we're doing right by the firms and our clients, and that we're being, you know, very thorough. And so I would say meticulous and tedious. Yeah, I would say that those kind of go hand in hand on this particular subject.
I would agree.
Joya, I really appreciate you jumping on with Tammy and I today. If anybody has any questions or would like to get in touch with us, our email address is support@mosaiclegalops.com. And, you know, we'd be happy to answer any questions that you have in regards to this podcast episode or any of the others that we've had as well. So, ladies, thank you so much. If neither of you have anything else, we'll go ahead and call it.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Joya. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.